Hello guys, welcome again to the Ava Lab. My name is Babatunde, and today we'll be working on rounding decimals. Okay, and I'm sure we might be familiar with what decimal means, but if we're not familiar to what decimal means, decimals basically means numbers with decimal points. Okay, so in this case, this has a decimal point here. This is a 0.95. Okay, and in this case, we have to round these decimals. Okay, so what that means is we have to basically remove every other number behind whatever we're being asked to round. Okay, so let's say we have 8.7. Okay, 8.75. Let me say 8.75. Okay, we have to round. Let's say we have to round this number to the nearest tenth. Okay, this number here is the nearest tenth. That means every number behind this 7, right, from 5 and beyond, they have to be counted. They have to be 0. That's what it means. Okay, so that's the same thing we're going to be doing here. Okay, but the thing is when we're working with this kind of question, okay, we're going to be rounding the decimals only. So that means we're going to be rounding the numbers behind the points here. Okay, so all these numbers here, we're going to be rounding them. All right, so let me start with the question. This question is asking us to round 8.95 to the nearest tenth. Okay, and as you can see here, I've written down some how these goes, right? So tenth basically means 0.1. Okay, so this 0 here is the normal number, the number in front of the decimal point. Okay, it's the normal integer, but this 0.1 is the decimal form. Okay, so the number immediately after the decimal point is the tenth, which is this one that is here. Okay, so this one here is the number after the decimal point, which in this case is the tenth. Okay, and it's the same thing for the hundredth. Okay, but the hundredth is that the number 1 is found 1 point after the decimal point. Okay, so the hundredth, when I ask to round off to the nearest hundredth, the hundredth will be the second digit after the decimal point. Okay, the thousandth is also the same thing, but in this case it will be the third digit after the decimal point. Okay, so what this basically means, negative exponent of tens. Okay, so what I mean by negative exponent of tens, so let's say we're giving 10 to the power minus 1, 10 to the power minus 2, 10 to the power minus 3, right? We know 10 to the power minus anything is basically saying 1 over 10 to the power, in this case 1, right? This is 1 over 10 to the power 2, which is 1 over 10 to the power 3, right? So we have to divide this number as it is, and when we divide this gives us a tenth, which is 0.1, right? 10 to the power 2 is 100, right? But since we're dividing, it becomes a hundredth, right? Emphasis on the th. Okay, so this becomes a hundredth in this case, right? When we divide 1 divided by 100, that gives us a 0.01, which gives us the hundredth. And same thing for thousands. When we divide 1 by 1000, that gives us 0.001. Okay, all right, so let's look at this question. We're asked to round 8.95 to the nearest tenth. Okay, so one general rule about rounding is that the number you're being asked to round, right, you have to look at the number that comes after it. Okay, so in this case, we have to be looking at 5. Okay, and we're going to ask ourselves, is that number greater than or equals to 5? If it is, we have to add 1 to the number in the 10th position in this case. Okay, so 5 is equals to 5, right? So 5 is the same thing as 5, so we have to add 1 to this 9. Okay, but let's say for example 5 was smaller, maybe there's a number smaller, let's say 3. Okay, if it's smaller than 5, right, then we can just remove that 3. We can remove everything that is behind the 10th position. Okay, that's in front of the 10th position, not bad. That's in front of the 10th position. We remove everything that is there, and then that basically means we've rounded it to the nearest tenth in that case. Okay, but in this case 5, right, this is the number before after the 10th. Okay, we know this is the 10th position. This is the 10th position. Okay, because it's the number immediately after the decimal point. Okay, this is the number immediately after the decimal point, 9. Right, so now we have to look at the hundredth. Right, we look at the next number after the 10th, which is the 100th, and ask ourselves, is this number greater than or equals to 5, or is it less than 5? Okay, this number is equals to 5, right? And since it's equals to 5, we have to add 1 to this 9. Okay, and then when we add 1, every other thing behind here becomes a 0. So this 5, starting from 5 with whatever, becomes a 0. Okay, so we have to say 8 points, and now this becomes a 9 plus 1. Let's just add on plus 1. Okay, and now 5 turns into a 0. So everything now is a 0 behind. All right, so now we're working with 8.9 plus 1, right? And I know sometimes it might be tricky to just write down 10 here. Okay, it might be tricky to write down 10. But when we're dealing with numbers behind decimal points, when we're dealing with these kind of numbers like this, right? Once we introduce ourselves to double digits, right? It's advisable to pass, especially we're working with 10 now. It's advisable to take in that 1 into the integer part of the equation you're working with. Okay, so you have to take in that 1 into this part of the equation that we're working with, because we know if you add 9 plus 1, it's going to give us a 10, right? And we can't just say 8.10, okay, 8.10 or 8.10 in here, okay? But since we know that this 9 is going to give us this 9 is gonna make it a 10, we can just add it in here. We can add 1 in here. Okay, so that's, with that saying, instead of saying 8.10, we can now say 8 plus 1, and then this turns into a 0. Okay, because 9 plus 1 is a 10, right? And since we're dealing with 10, this is the 10th position, right? This can't be greater than, this basically can't be greater than double digits. If it's so, then it's crossed the 10th. Okay, so we take this 1 here, and then this turns into a 0. Okay, so this becomes 8 plus 1.9 here, then turns into a 0. Okay, so this is a 0. So 8 plus 1, we know that's a 9, right? So this becomes 9.0. Okay, so remember, we have to show this 0, which signifies that we've rounded to the nearest 10th. Okay, so this 9.0 is basically the nearest 10th. Okay, so you have to put this 0 here because it's the position of the 10th. Okay, so let's put that in 9.0. Correct. Okay, so let's work with more questions. Feel free to pause the video if you like, but if not, enjoy and just get to it. 0.258, we're asked to round this to the nearest 100. Okay, and in the hundreds is the position 1 point after the decimal point. Okay, so 100 is the second placement, okay, after the decimal point. Okay, so in this case, the 100 will be 5, right, because it's 1 digit behind the decimal point. Okay, and we're asked to round this to the nearest 100. Okay, and enough for us to do that, we're going to have to ask ourselves, what is the number after the 100? So in this case, the number is 8. And we're going to ask ourselves, is this 8 greater than 5 or equals to 5, or is it less than 5? Okay, so since it's greater than 5, we have to add 1 to this 5 here. Okay, so 5 is basically the gap between whether you're going to add or if you're going to leave the number as it is. Okay, so 5 is basically the gap. Okay, so if the number is greater than or equals to 5, if it's from 5 upwards here, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, right? Then we can add 1 to the position we're asked to run from. But if it's less than, which is 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, then we'll just leave it as it is and then cancel every other thing to a 0. Okay, so we're asked to run 0.258 to the nearest 100. Okay, so this is 5 here. This is the position of the 100, right? And the next position after that is 8. And then we'll ask ourselves, is this 8 greater than or equals to 5, or is it less than 5? Okay, we know 8 is greater than 5, right? It's in this part. So that means we have to add 1 to this 5 here. And then we can remove everything behind 5. So this 8 cancels out to a 0. And then everything behind 8 turns into a 0. Okay, so let me put that in here, 0.258. And since we already know this 8 is bigger than 5, this cancels out to 0, and then we add a 1 to this 5. Okay, so this turns into 0.25 plus 1, that's a 6, right? 2, 6. And then since this is a 0, there's no need to put a 0 here. So since we're asked to round to the nearest 100, so this is the 100. So the 100 has to be the last digit, since we're asked to round to the nearest 100. Okay, so 6 will be the last digit here, and the 100 is here in this position, so should be the last one. Okay, so this should be 0.26. Check. Yeah. Okay, so let me retrace my steps. What I did here was the first step that I took was I identified the position we're being asked to round. Okay, so in this case we're asked to round 0.258 to the nearest 100, and we know the 100 based on this is the number one digit behind the decimal point. Okay, so the number here is 5. Okay, so because there's a number here 2, and this is another number 5. This is a 10, this is 100, this is 1000, right? So 5 was the position in the 100, right? And then I will move over to the next number, which is 8 here, and ask myself, is that 8 greater than 5, or is it equal to 5, or is that 8 less than 5? Okay, so 8 is greater than 5, right? And since 8 is greater than 5, I have to add 1 to the number occupying the 100th position. Okay, so I have to add 1 to 5 here. Okay, so when I added 1 to the 5, that gave me a 6. And since I'm rounding to the nearest 100, I have to cancel every other thing that's ranging from 100 to that's ranging from 1000 to whenever. Okay, so this is 1000. Okay, so I have to cancel whatever digits that started from here to the very end. Okay, so this is 8. So I cancelled 8 here. I cancelled everything that was behind this 5, as long as this 5 is applicable here. So I cancelled it out, and I added 1 to the 5 here. Okay, so that ended up to being 0.2. 5 plus 1 was a 6. So that will give me the answer here, 0.26. Okay, rounding decimals is really important when you start working with big numbers, and it's really important, especially using everyday mathematics. And yeah. Okay, so thank you very much for watching the video. Have a beautiful day ahead. Bye.